All right. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I'm Steve at Work Back Market. This is some of the colors that we have in our brand. It's green on green with some yellow. I love green, so I'm cool with it. I've heard it's not super legible. I hope it's okay tonight. And it's not impossible that in a few months, maybe in a year, we're told that we should change our colors. And that's okay, because we have design tokens. Right, so design tokens, I'm sure many of you know, but they're collections of design values like colors, typography, spacings that you use to draw your UIs. And the idea of design tokens is each of them has a name and you have relations between the different names. So a token itself is not very useful, but a token system allows you with relations between the tokens to consistently create UIs. So for instance, we have a static background and we have a static text that goes with it. And in the name, you can see that there's an implicit relation between them. If you look at the third line here, you can see as well that we have low and high tokens. So we have a hierarchy that's created, and this is also an implicit relation between tokens. Now, very often we're told that design tokens allow us to unify language between designers and developers, right? So we provide them on every platform, and that's super useful. We are also told that they allow us to have a more consistent brand identity. That's also true. Then we are told that they help us make brand changes without effort, and that one is not true. Right, I really want to emphasize this. My boss is not in the room. It's okay, I can tell you it's a lie. Right, and why is that? The thing is, we have implicit usage rules, and these implicit rules often are tailored to a specific brand identity. So for instance, material design, it's very specific, right? You've got this mid-tone, very saturated color, and some brands, they just don't work with it. And now the issue with this is, when you rebrand, you need to change your system, right? So your system is very nice and it helps you be consistent, but then when you rebrand, the system's no longer working. And also, it does happen, I have to say it, sometimes we make mistakes and we need to fix them. So we need to change the system because, well, we make mistakes. Now, that means if we're changing these design tokens, we need to change our code. You do a rebranding and you need, fine, you change your values and then you go to your code and you need to change all the variables everywhere because the system has changed. And you do that manually. And Zvada, what I want to talk about today is I don't think this needs to be manual. I think we can find a way to kind of, deliver the original promise of tokens. And so we're going to see how we can possibly do that. Right, so there's one thing that works with tokens is they formalize how we write style code. Without tokens, we just write, CSS rules, hard-coded values everywhere. And with tokens, we keep making references to variables that have a name. And often migrating code that uses token is about renaming variables. So we're going to try and exploit this. For instance, let's say we are moving from a typography scale from 1 to 5 to a scale with headings and bodies. So we're going to see on the first line that we're going to rename one variable. And then maybe we're splitting the primary color and for background and text, maybe we're splitting it between action colors and static colors. And again, we're going to be renaming variables. Maybe we're introducing a focus color as well, and it's the same thing. And you have a few, I would say, building blocks that come up quite often. Right? So the very simple one, the one that we're told about when we learn about tokens is you change a value, you don't have to migrate your code. Cool. Then when you add a token, often you want to remove hard-coded values that are in your CSS. You want to replace them with the name of a variable. And then, the other way around, if you remove a token for some reason, then you want to replace the name of a token with a variable. And the most common use case, the one that happens all the time, is you rename a token or you replace a whole system with a whole other system and you need to change like names of references all over the place. There are two main problems when you migrate token code. The first one is you might have token names that exist in your old system and your new system, but they don't have the same value, right? We'll see a few examples in a moment. And that's a problem because then at some point in your code, you need to know if you're using the old system or the new one. You can't have both of them at the same time. You can't just deprecate. And you need to be smart about the order in which you change your tokens when you're migrating. And the other issue is, in some cases, you're going to replace one token by several. So I said, for instance, we want to introduce action and static colors. Then we need to figure out in our code where we want to reference the action color or the static color. So we need a way to do that. And if we can't figure out a programmatic way to do that, we'll do it by hand, which is not cool. Right, so what we're using at Backmarket to kind of, get rid of this problem is code modding. So code modding, a code mod engine is something that allows you to operate on the grammar of your program. It allows you to find patterns and replace them. And it's a little bit smarter than what you can do with regexes because you have access to some of the context in which your code is. So just the basics. Code modding refers to two things, right? There's the engine. This is basically a static analysis tool. It's a compiler in some sense. And it builds what's called an abstract syntax tree, example in a minute. And it gives you an API so that you can edit parts of this tree. And this is how you modify your program. And then code mods themselves, they're scripts that use the engine to perform a specific migration. And now, just a basic example, hello world. This is a statement in a programming language. As we can see, we're calling a function. So calling a function means that we have a call expression. We are calling something that is an object property. So on the left-hand side of the expression, we will see a property access expression with an identifier for the object being accessed and another one for the property name. And then, of course, arguments, because we call a function with arguments. And here we just have one. It's a string literal, hello world. So here, for instance, I could say hello Paris if I replace my string literal with hello Paris. I could say console.error if I looked for a property access expression and I replaced the name log by the name error when the expression is console. So you get the idea. We'll make it a bit more complicated in a moment, maybe. Right, so our spacing scale at Backmarket until a few months ago, there are a few issues. Right, so it's all very nice and dandy. We have a 4-pixel scale and it works super well until this. Right, so yeah, size 1, we couldn't do 0.25, it's not very elegant. And also at the end, I don't know, we're not very good at mathematics, so that happened. And of course, one of the issues we have is we can't change it anymore, right? We can't fit any new values in. So like I said, we make mistakes, we made a mistake, it happened. But we knew that we wanted to change this. So we wanted to move to something that is a bit more consistent and a bit more predictable, and also that allows us to add values. So a very simple idea, because we're still not good at math. So spacing 4 pixels, spacing 12 pixels, 20, and so on. Now, I've told you that there can be conflicts when you migrate a token system. This is an example where in our old scale, spacing 4 was 16 pixels, but now we want it to mean 4 pixels. So we need to be careful. When we look at our code, we need to know if we're using the old or the new value. And spacing 1 used to mean 4 pixels, and now it becomes 1. So what happens now if we start saying, okay, so we're going to rename spacing 1, and then spacing 2, and then spacing 3, and so on? Well, we'll rename spacing 1 to spacing 4, and then when we arrive at spacing 4, we don't know which is which anymore. So this is what we want to avoid. When you migrate a token system, you will have name conflicts, and they have to inform how you order your migration steps. So we use view and tailwind. And because of that, of course, we use an engine that works for our stack. So basically, our CSS is a bunch of class attributes. It's a bunch of TW tag templates. So TW is just a helper we use for like auto-completion, ESLint, and so on. So we know that we have a very formal, structured way of writing CSS, and it's either the top part here or the bottom one. It's one or the other. So it should be fairly easy to find references to our token and rename them. Now, of course, if you're in a different company, you have a different stack, you will have a different answer to that specific problem. But we know that once we know how to address the CSS, we can do however many migrations we want. So this is how we find our class attributes, right? So our CodeMod engine has an API for HTML templates. We look for attributes that are named class. So far, so good. We take the value inside and we pass it to a transform function, which we'll see in a moment. And then we just edit the attribute to use the new value. Right, so for instance, we have this, and then we can turn it into 24 instead of 6. So, yep. Yeah, it's simple when it's just 2 values. So it gets a bit harder when it's 20,000 or something. So for JS, we can also look at, this time we use JS code shift, a very common JavaScript code modding engine. Ask Norbert about it, he has opinions. Tag template expressions are what we're looking for, and we want the ones that are named TW. And we're gonna look at all the content in these templates, and we're gonna transform them again with our function. And it works. Right, so it's very advanced stuff, right? We take a string with spaces, we split it based on the spaces, and then we start transforming, starting with the higher values, because we know that it works in our case. So we transform it, you know, and then we transform it some more, and then again, and again. And we thought we might as well get rid of all these hard-coded values that, you know, justify the migration in the first place, so we did it. And then very simple operation, we put it back together. And that's it. We have an extremely advanced data structure for this, right? It's a map. The old values point to the new values. It took us months of engineering to figure out. And of course, we have a list of classes that we want to transform. I'm actually lying here. We have a list of classes that we want to preserve because it's easier in Tailwind, but you get the point. And was it worth it? Well, it took us about 5 days to figure out how we wanted to address all these bits, build the scripts and the CI to run the script. We have over 2,500, sorry, I'm really bad at maths, files in our design system and our web app that use Tailwind. And if I estimate based on the sample that we ran it on originally, it's about 4,000 references to tokens that we can transform in about 15 minutes. So it was worth it because it would have taken months. And what's really interesting about building this capability is we're ready for the next time. And the next time came immediately after because we made another mistake. We used to have 10 pixel REMs, and we knew we had to fix it. And we also wanted to change our typography scale, and we also didn't want to do it by hand. And these are things that can now be done in an hour instead of 5 days. And we're ready for when we need to get rid of a green text. Right, so code mods can be a very, very powerful tool. When you can make them work for your needs, they can really allow you to transform your code in kind of like an exponential fashion. And in the case of design tokens, what I'm absolutely convinced of is this promise that you can keep changing your style, changing your brand without having to rework all your code. It is possible to deliver on that promise if you automate a process. And this is what code mods are about. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Steve. Questions? I'm seeing Kevin. I'm seeing a new guy. We'll be back. We'll be back.
Thank you. Yeah, I found it amazing. Actually, how do you said it took you 5 days to figure it out how you would basically build the new code base. However, the design had to find out like every single place where the width and height would change and so on. So basically all the time, like how long did it take? Because the system had to change, right?
So in terms of controlling the impact of this migration, because we were just changing our scale, we're not changing the values. So we knew that the style had to be the same, right? We use an amazing visual regression testing tool called Chromatic. And it worked really well. And if you ask me, I'm really against visual regression testing until then. So yeah, it worked really well for this use case. If you're doing a rebranding and you're actually changing the styles that you have, you do need to QA, of course. And then it's a matter of building the script that's going to cover most of your use cases, getting rid of all the simple cases, and then QAing properly. So we did a color change as well, which we did not code mode, because the code mode engine that we have, I'm the author, so I can say it, it sucks. And there are some things that we can't really do with it. So when it doesn't work anymore, then of course we do it manually. And of course we want to QA what we're doing, but even when we ran this, we did change thousands of files. We had maybe 3 or 4 files where there were things that we couldn't have predicted. And we had maybe 10 or so files where we could have predicted, but we didn't. But it took my colleagues like maybe an hour or two to fix all this. So yeah, it was still worth it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Next question. Okay.
What about ESLint?
Right, so this is a question that we discuss a lot in my team. ESLint is a tool that essentially allows you to do almost the same thing. It also builds an AST. It allows you to search for patterns, and it allows you to change those patterns and fix them. And the key difference between linters and code mod engines is linters think something is kind of perpetually bad, and we want to turn it to do something perpetually good. And in the case where you have conflicts in your old and new code bases that you want to enforce, you can't really just say that the old code is bad, so to speak, and needs to be fixed, because the old code and the new code sometimes look exactly the same. So you need to make sure that there is a before and an after, and there's a moment where you choose for your code base to go from the before to the after. And if you don't do that, there will be use cases where your linter keeps running, and it keeps changing your code, and the conflicts come up.
Awesome. Thank you. Any more questions?
How do you ship this big PR like modification? Do you ship it once with the modification, the 2,500 files at once?
That's why you want to write it, so you don't have to review it.
Nice. Any more down here? I'm coming. There you go.
Hi, just from a designer's point of view, you changed from a case solution where you had certain steps in 4 pixels, which I like, to, as far as I understand, an open format. So how do you prevent faulty use from those values?
I don't think there is a faulty use. Like the values that we wanted to embed, oh my God, my designer colleague is turning around. Okay, I take it back. Right, no, seriously. Like, for instance, 10 pixels, it's not on our scale. We know we don't want it in the design, right? But it so happens that sometimes when we align things, we need to define the spacing of something else by 2. And it's not exactly compliance, but it happens. And at the end of the day, what we wanted to do here was to have a system where things don't break yet, and then we can introduce spacing that is a lot more voluntary. But when you try to build a spacing scale that works for every component, for every use case, you end up finding that you don't have enough values.
Fair.
And so instead of rushing to a semantic system where we had it all figured out, we kind of wanted to have something stable that just doesn't break anymore, and then we could build on top of that. So we haven't found a solution yet. We still have a lot of work to do. But we know that what we have is reliable.
So there's no checking if it's compliant with design thought.
So we don't provide every value. We do provide in the scale basically everything from 1 to 20 because we know that it's useful in some edge cases for borders and radius and whatnot. And then we produce everything in steps of 4 up until 96. And then we only introduce values voluntarily, and we have a comment that says this value is used for that use case. We think it's valid. So you still can add values when you have a reason for them. But we're no longer in a position where we think that adding a value is bad, essentially.
Okay.
Awesome. Any more for any more? Are you good? I'm aware there might be some on Zoom, but I couldn't work out how to look at it. Do you want to are there any?
Yeah. All right. So, a few questions. Share some URL to documentation. I'll share some when we share the slides. Sure. Anthony asking, despite relying on QA and chromatic, how confident were you when you shipped the whole migration? So we're cheating a little bit here. We know that it's not going to production immediately because we're in the process of changing our front-end framework as well. So it's going to live in some staging environment for some time. And it's okay if we make a mistake. And we do make mistakes anyway, but we certainly do a lot fewer mistakes when we make thousands of changes at once rather than, manually. The thing is, if we did make a mistake, it would be catastrophically large. And we haven't seen a catastrophically large mistake, so we're somewhat confident. And then we have someone asking if multiple themes, it's hard to have names like system. Okay, sorry, I'm going to read the whole thing in my head first. Right, so yeah, they're raw values. We don't have themes here. We want the value to extremely predictably, we want the name to extremely predictably tell you about the value. So 16 is always 16. When we build semantic spacing, so one use case we have is we want to have spacing for our layout, things like grids, for our front office and back office, and we want the back office to be a lot denser because it has more information. At this stage, with names that we've chosen specifically for some use cases of layout that have a control perimeter, then we will introduce different values and themes, but not in the row scale. The point is, having this row scale for us is necessary until we figure out any better, and we didn't know that before. That's why we migrated.